Okay, everybody, this is an experiment just to see if this program will enable me to record stuff. If it does, I may be using it in the fall. You should see right in front of you, minimally, the notes from today's class, and it's Monday, the 27th of July, 2015. This is going to be very rough, and so you'll see me doing some funky stuff, but I'm going to try to keep talking to keep a bare minimum of your interests going here. And it looks like I've picked up the PDF version of your notes, so I'm not going to be as fluid as I might otherwise be. In any event, here are your due dates. Now, as you know, we have exam 3 on Wednesday, and then on Thursday we have our final exam. And I mentioned in class today, in case you were absent, that you are not assigned 9-10, exercise 9-10. However, if you go on to Moodle, you will discover that it is available for you. The answers to 9-10 are available for you already. The other ones become available immediately after their due time, which is Wednesday at 10:30 a.m. That's 9-2 and 9-7. So work on those and bring them to class tomorrow, Tuesday, July 28th, if you haven't already worked on them, and you happen to get this before then, which in most cases I realize is unlikely. Okay, now one of the reasons I chose this file to go through is because it has so much information, and again, this is listed as notes 150727 in Moodle. The reason I chose to open this file is because it's got just about everything you need to be prepared for exam 3 and a lot of stuff that you will need to be sure that you have learned before the final exam on Thursday. So today in class, if you were absent, we went over appeal to common practice, appeal to expertise. We noted that there are all these kinds of doctorates in the United States, which indicates that it's neither necessary nor sufficient to have a doctorate. Rather, it's neither necessary nor sufficient to have a license to practice medicine in order to be a doctor. That's an error that came up in our unit on analytical definition. Some people said that an analysis of what a doctor is that you are somebody with a license to practice medicine. And somebody might have such a license, I suppose, and yet not be able to practice medicine for some other reason, which shows that it isn't necessarily sufficient. Maybe they're not able to practice medicine because they're physically incapacitated, for example, or mentally capacitated, but the agency licensing them hasn't caught up with them yet. On the other hand, if you're a doctor of transformational leadership, number 86 that you see here, that I'm putting the cursor over, I do not think that you will have a license to practice medicine, and yet in our country you're still a doctor. Okay, appeal to popularity we went over, appeal to tradition. We said that appeal to popularity, appeal to tradition, and appeal to common practice are all kind of bandwagon fallacies. Appeal to popularity deals with beliefs. Appeal to tradition is diachronic, things that play out over time, like hazing, which is a good example that shows why we don't want to engage in that kind of reasoning unknowingly. And then, what did I leave out? Appeal to the synchronic kind, which is appeal to common practice. And I gave you an example about some editing that I have to do on medical documents from time to time. I won't go over the details. Apple polishing is good old-fashioned, what is it? Apple polishing, simple flattery. Yeah, good old-fashioned flattery. Argument from envy, the thing to note about that, I don't think I brought it out in class, is that here we may attribute some negative characteristics to the person. Outrage we went over fairly well, same with downplayers. Euphemism we've gone over, that's where you use language that is not neutral but that tends to favor whatever concept or object or person that you're talking about. Genetic fallacy, we gave a good example in class. You criticize the origin of something's belief in order to dismiss it as something else that you don't think is worthy of our acceptance. Government management of the news. It's surprising how often the government will, candidates, for example, or even elected officials will hire news agencies that they know that share their bias in order to flagrantly promote certain posture on issues within their campaigns that may or may not go against the majority of their constituents. But if you do click on this link, you'll see one example of that, where a guy who's extremely conservative was hired to write some paid ads, but he was in turn paid for the ads that he placed by a government official. So we want to look out for that. Groupthink, I'll let you deal with on your own. I do want to talk briefly about feeling guilty versus being guilty with respect to number 13, guilt trip. He's very hurt that you didn't invite him to your wedding. He would never exclude you from such an important event in his own life. Okay, so usually guilt trip is used to try to make somebody feel guilty. It's important to recognize, however, that there's a difference between feeling guilty and being guilty. Now, there's a famous example from Socrates where he said in the Republic, or at least Plato has him speak as though he said, that it's possible to be honorable and yet not be honored, and yet it's possible to be honored and not be honorable. And if you think that through for a minute, you can probably think of people who are definitely honorable, but they're very simple folk who don't have, any access to media. They don't even know how to use social networking. And yet they're just a totally cool, decent human being, maybe very given to volunteer work and that sort of thing, and yet it never comes to the light of day. They're still honorable even though they aren't honored. Now, and vice versa, somebody can be honored. A lot of people have been honored in history who are, it turns out, not really honorable. And I'll let you use your imaginations to think of examples, because it's not really my job to pick on anybody in particular. Okay, now the same thing is true with guilt. You can objectively be guilty of something and yet feel absolutely no guilt over it at all. And likewise, you can feel tremendous guilt over something, and yet it might be unreasonable to feel the guilt that you're feeling. And so our background beliefs play a large role in determining how this plays out in our own minds. But the object in the guilt trip fallacy is to try to get you to feel guilt, whether or not you actually are guilty. Now, it wouldn't be a case, however, of the guilt trip fallacy if in fact somebody pointed out that you were guilty, let's say, of breaking a law, because if you were, then objectively you would be guilty, even though you may not feel as though you're guilty. So it can be a little bit tricky. With respect to hyperbole, I invite you to read what I've written, and also to note that I have put up a link which will help you deal with positives, comparatives, and superlatives. And superlatives are commonly a good sign that you may be dealing with a hyperbole. Hyperbole is just an exaggerated overstatement in its nascent form. It's N-A-S-C-E-N-T, nascent form. It's primitive, simple form. It's just an extravagant overstatement, so keep that in mind. Line drawing turns out to be kind of interesting. If I have, just to give you a simple example, and I'll let you think about this on your own, if I have a canvas, and the painter Rothko was very famous for such canvases, where on one side it's clearly red, and yet on the other side of the canvas it's clearly yellow, and in between it's orange, but you cannot point to any one spot where the red gradually becomes orange and the orange gradually becomes yellow, then somebody could say, well, since you cannot tell me when that painting stopped being red and started being orange, or when it stopped being orange and started being yellow, there is no grounds for saying that it's red versus yellow, because you can't tell me the line at which that stopped or began, right? And so that's fallacious reasoning as well. And while the canvas is only used for illustrative purposes, you can probably cook up some arguments in which that kind of reasoning is involved as well. Okay, I'm going to skip to 19, let you look at the others on your own. The undistributed middle fallacy is interesting because, we're going to deal with that on Tuesday in class because it superficially resembles the chain argument pattern, which is a valid form of reasoning, and yet the undistributed middle is a fallacious form of reasoning. I'll show you some techniques in class for dealing with that. When I get a little more sophisticated with this recording device, I might be able to actually do it on a screen, but I'm not there yet. Okay, now what I want you to see is that if you keep scrolling down, I've included all those practice exercises that I've invited you to do. Now, in an ideal situation, I just start typing away, and I try to solve these for you. But right now, it's sufficient just for me to alert you to the fact that there's 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, and 4 pages of such exercises. Now, my fantasy is that some of you will come to class on Tuesday with a large number of those done, and you'll also discover places where you weren't able to quite finish an exercise, or you're uncertain of how to answer or how to translate something correctly, or how to determine whether or not an argument is valid or invalid. And that will constitute a good portion of our class work. Okay, well, this has been fun. Let's see if it actually works. I'm kind of excited to find out. And congratulations on almost having completed summer school at Long Beach City College this summer of 2015. Have a good evening.